Hi, this is Dale Maxfield, and this is a list of films that I feel sort of got forgotten about from 2013. I was getting ready to do something similar to this for the 2014 year. Obviously, I've reviewed a lot of movies online in 2014. A lot of in the car style reviews have been done. So there's a lot of those that are that I've already kind of highlighted. But I want to take a step back a little bit because over the last year, there's been a number of people that have asked me, or I've been talking to somebody about a movie, and I'll ask them if they've seen, X movie from 2013, and these are movies that I feel like I recommend a lot that most people don't know about or haven't heard about. So I'm calling these like my sleeper hits of 2013. This isn't a list for everybody. This isn't like a universal recommendation, but certainly there's been people over the last year or so that have asked me about different movies, or we've been having a discussion, and these have come up, and they've been movies that, for one reason or another, I've recommended to people. So yeah, so hopefully this is helpful if you're looking for something to watch, or if maybe find something in here that you missed that sounds interesting. Maybe you'll find a good movie out of it. So having said that, moving through my list, the first movie I want to talk about is Lovelace, and Lovelace is a movie starring Amanda Seyfried as the title character. Linda Lovelace was sort of one of the first crossover stars where she was in the movie Deep Throat in 1972, and that movie became this huge sensation. It went on to make $600 million worldwide. They played it in normal theaters. It was sort of this really strange time when adult films were sort of being treated like regular, releases, regular Hollywood releases. Where I think a lot of people get down on this movie or decide not to see it or aren't interested for whatever reason. If you look at like a synopsis of this movie, it talks about how Linda Lovelace was used and abused, and that the movie is about her story and in her, from her perspective, what it was like to be in the middle of that whole thing, where her husband was basically forcing her to at first be a prostitute and then be an adult film star, and she eventually got away from him and wrote a memoir about it, and some of that plays into the movie as well. But so where I think that fell apart for a lot of people, where I think a lot of people kind of saw that, if they saw a preview for it or if they read the synopsis or something, they would think, well, this isn't for me. And it's not, that's not the wrong impression to get, but it's something that I think when I explain it, it makes a little bit more sense as to why I would recommend this film, why I actually think it's a good movie to see. The used and abused part of it feels like it's going to be a depressing and, just sad, and why would I put myself through watching this kind of movie? On the other hand, if you hadn't seen that synopsis and you were like, oh, it's a film about Linda Lovelace, and you see the trailers make it look like it was kind of a fun thing, kind of a fun project. And the movie Deep Throat itself is kind of silly movie. It's kind of a they play goofy music during it, and it's all got kind of a comedic story to it, which I'm not going to go into all of that here, but the movie itself, the actual Lovelace film, is told in a non-chronological way, and it's a really interesting way to tell this story, where the first half of the movie, they're telling you the Hollywood star story. It's all these wonderful things are happening, and they're happening into this deal, and suddenly they have this giant movie that's everywhere, and she's a big star, and she can do whatever she wants, and then she sort of leaves her husband, and that seems sort of like overkill for what's going on. But then they back up and they tell you basically all the things that you missed. So you get to see bits and pieces of scenes that were happening sort of around the first half of the movie. And it does it in a really clever way where you don't feel like you're watching the same movie twice in a row. You feel like you're getting more information. And that second part is where they get into how abusive her husband was. They get into how, there were things where she was forced to do things at gunpoint. And there's a storyline involving her trying to retreat to her parents, and her mother telling her that, she made her choice and she got married, and, she's of the age of you just follow, you do what your husband says because that's your job as a wife, sort of thing. And so it really does a great job of telling that story in such a way that it's intriguing, and you get to have a little bit of fun with it at the first part. You get to see a little bit about what kind of public perception might have been like during that time. But then the second half is much more her perspective and things from her memoir that she wrote about how she, was forced into and eventually escaped being in this really toxic relationship, and being, even though she was like the biggest adult film star of all time and all of that sort of stuff, she wanted out, and you understand why when you see all these things that happened to her. It's a really fascinating movie, a really interesting story. The structure of the story is really neat, and Amanda Seyfried is really good in it as the title character. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in, totally check it out. If you're worried about it being too sexist or abusive or those sorts of things, I would say it's not really that bad to watch. I mean, it's definitely a pro woman movie, a pro Linda movie, but there may be some things that make you uncomfortable, and so that's why I'd say, it's not a universal recommendation, but it's probably a less painful movie to watch than you might think. So check it out if that sounds good to you. So another movie that I recommend quite a bit is a movie called Rush, and Rush is directed by Ron Howard. It stars Chris Hemsworth from the Thor movies and Daniel Bruhl, and they play F1. It's a real life, another biopic, a real life story of two F1 racers that are competitors, and they're kind of rivals. This is a movie that it has there's a lot of things from the marketing perspective that I think went wrong with this movie, and I think it's the reason why a lot of people missed it. But it's such a great movie. So here's what I think went wrong. They have Chris Hemsworth first build, and the poster is like a close-up of his face, and it's almost like they want to try and attract people that would just, go see anything that has him in it, which is really a mistake and a shame because he's not really the main character. Daniel Bruhl's Niki Lauda is the main focus of the story. He's really the person you follow the most. Chris Hemsworth plays this rival, and he's sort of this English playboy who, has had everything handed to him, and he races the F1, and Chris Hemsworth does a great job in the movie, and he's really believable as this, 1970s era celebrity that can do no wrong and is really kind of a jerk. But eventually these two men sort of become more respectful of one another, and they have this kind of strange rivalry / friendship throughout the movie. The other big problem with the movie is that it's called Rush. That's a really hard title for people to remember. There's people that I tell they should go see Rush, and they'll forget it. Like, I'll tell people to see Rush every week for a month, and they'll forget every time. What was that movie you were telling me about? It's like, oh yeah, you told me about that race car movie. I should really check that out. So what's great about this movie? It's a really interesting biopic about F1 racing that like I could care less about F1 racing. I'm not a big sports fan in general, but certainly, F1 is a much bigger deal in Europe than it is here in the US. And it just doesn't matter. The story is so good and it's so compelling. The performances are so great. Daniel Bruhl is amazing in this movie. Really just deserves to be seen. Without giving a whole lot of spoilers away, there's sort of things are fairly even between the two of them, and then Niki Lauda has a accident, and it doesn't seem like he's going to be able to race again. And it's partially, you can kind of see where Chris Hemsworth's character sort of blames himself for that and tries to be nice to him and tries to help him with stuff, and they really kind of push each other. And sort of in the long run, it's interesting to see how, Chris Hemsworth, when he grows up and becomes a little bit older and less of the it person, less of the pop culture figure than he was in the original at the beginning of the movie. How his marriages fall apart and those sorts of things. Versus Niki Lauda, who's always been about being the best racer and doing the best job, and it not being about, that's the thing he's passionate about, and he's really clear about that. So it's hard to describe, but it's the action sequences are fantastic. The F1 races are really well done. The drama parts of it are really well done. The acting between Hemsworth and Bruhl is really well done. Their wives are also very good. The characters of the wives in the movies. So yeah, it's a movie that I feel like that one's pretty close to a universal recommendation that I think just about any movie fan would really enjoy. You just have to get over the fact that it's got a silly name, Rush, which doesn't tell you anything. It's not a documentary about the band from Canada. It's and getting over the fact that it's not a Chris Hemsworth vehicle. It's a story about these two rivals. And also that, there's actually a movie about F1 racing that's really exciting and really fun. So, I would recommend that to just about anybody to check out Rush. You can find it on most of the streaming services at this point. It didn't do very well at the box office, and, kind of the reasons I was talking about before, I think is why. But if you get the chance, check it out. I think you'd really enjoy it. Another movie that I really liked from 2013 was The Frozen Ground. And The Frozen Ground is a real-life story about an investigation into the disappearance of a bunch of girls, and sort of this profile of younger girls that all kind of go missing. They're mostly either sort of like runaways or prostitutes or that sort of thing that are disappearing. Nicolas Cage plays the investigator, and everyone kind of thinks he's a bit of a laughingstock because he's got this theory, and they can't really seem to figure it out, and they keep finding bodies, and people keep disappearing, and it becomes really hard for them to figure out what's going on or how to stop it. And what happens is that one of the intended victims, played by Vanessa Hudgens, manages to escape, and she has a lot of detail about how she was kept, where she got away, how she was taken to where she got away, that starts really clicking with what their investigation is, and it leads them to John Cusack's character, who is essentially, this isn't spoiling anything. They come right out and tell you that he's the guy. He's the guy that's been taking all these girls and making them disappear. What they can't do is prove it, and they can't. He's so good at preventing them from finding him out that they know it's him. They're watching him. They keep closing in, and they just can't quite figure everything out. But he's he plays a really different, really interesting character for John Cusack. He's that he has this really strange double life where he seems like just a normal family man, kind of a pillar of the community, uh, runs a store and a bunch of people work for him, and he's really nice to his neighbors. He's really nice to everybody. But, a couple times a year, his wife and kids leave town, and he kidnaps someone for several days, holds them in his house, in this like lodge, and then he's a licensed pilot, and the movie takes place in Alaska, and they basically fly out to the middle of nowhere, and he kills them, or he hunts them basically, and kills them and buries them in the frozen ground. And so part of the movie is is Nick Cage trying to protect Vanessa Hudgens long enough to get her to testify against him, to get her to, get the information from him. Part of it is them trying to get John Cusack to essentially understand that he's not going to get to do any of this again, that the only way he's going to win or be able to show off, how great he was, is to tell them where all the bodies are. And Nicolas Cage's character is also really fascinating because he's just this super depressed guy. He's trying to leave the police force because it's just been such a negative in his life, and he and his wife want to move on and get out of there. And basically, like, right as he's about to do that, Vanessa Hudgens' character falls into his lap, and no one at the police is really taking her seriously. So he actually ends up putting her up at his house and explaining to his wife, like, who she is and what this could mean. And the wife's reaction's really unique and interesting too. Like, she's not on board with it at first at all. She just wants him to leave and quit and everything as well. So, I've told you a lot about this movie, and that doesn't scrape the surface. There's so much going on. Definitely check out The Frozen Ground if you're interested in the sort of mystery thriller type of movies. Great showcase for all three of the main actors. Nick Cage, John Cusack, and Vanessa Hudgens are all fantastic in it. So give that a shot if you get the chance to. Here's another one that I recommend a lot. This is probably what I consider the funniest R-rated comedy of 2013, and it's a movie called Pain and Gain. This is another one that I think people sort of overlooked, or they saw the trailer and they thought that looked stupid, or they saw who was involved and they were like, yeah, I don't think so. And especially now after Transformers 4 came out, which was a Michael Bay, Mark Wahlberg movie, I think there's a lot of people that just sort of turn their nose up at Pain and Gain because it's also directed by Michael Bay and Mark Wahlberg is the main character in it. But man, is it a funny movie. Like I said, I think it's the funniest R-rated comedy of 2013. It's also a true life story, or a sort of a retelling of a story about these three bodybuilders. Mark Wahlberg's one of them. One of them is played by The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, and they sort of happen into this kidnapping where they are going to try and extort money from this kind of jerk business guy that is paying Mark Wahlberg's character to train him as a physical trainer. And that character's played by Tony Shalhoub from Monk. Just really funny characters too. So they try to kidnap him and extort money from him, and he just kind of won't do it. And they finally get the money, and Tony Shalhoub's trying to convince the police to investigate them and get his money back, but his story is so unbelievable because it's so unbelievable how stupid these guys are that they actually got away with this, that really no one believes him. He ends up hiring a private detective, Ed Harris, his character, to try and figure out what's going on with them, and they end up in a situation where, because they're so stupid, and the characters really are stupid. They like blow through all their money in like no time at all, and so they end up trying to do it again, and it goes even worse. And there's a couple of points where, one in particular, where a subtitle comes up and everything on the screen freezes and it just says, "This is still a true story." And it's one of the biggest laughs in the movie because it's so preposterous, the stuff that's going on in this movie, that you can't believe it actually happened, but it did. And it's so funny to watch these characters that are, trying to do something so mean and or so greedy, and they're just so bad at it, and so weird. The Rock's character is like a really devout Christian, and somehow he's like trying to reconcile that with the stuff that he's doing, and he's like, sort of becoming friends with Tony Shalhoub, even though that character is Jewish and they're supposed to be, keeping him hostage, and it's a riot. Definitely check out Pain and Gain if you're in the mood for a great comedy. It is an R-rated comedy. It's not something for kids. It's not something for everybody in the family to watch. But yeah, if you can handle the level of the violence that's in it and the language that's in it, it's definitely worth checking out. It is a very, very funny movie. So yeah, that's Pain and Gain. Check that one out. Another movie that I think a lot of people missed in 2013 was Don John. That is written, directed, and starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt. The reason I think a lot of people missed it was that they weren't sure about the subject matter, which is about a guy who is addicted to pornography. Even when he's in a relationship or when he's out, kind of getting a one-night stand or any of that sort of thing, real women are no substitute for pornography for him. And I think for people that haven't seen the movie, that synopsis sounds like a movie that will attempt to justify that as a real, a real need or a real thing that, this is something that all men do, or, just you need to learn to live with it or that sort of thing. But that's not what it's about at all. It's really about him overcoming that. And at the same time, it has a really interesting sort of flip side perspective of that, which is his girlfriend at the beginning of the film, which is played by Scarlett Johansson, has a sort of a similar, sort of addictive personality or a way of being, a way of treating him, that is, she basically uses sex to manipulate him and get whatever she wants, and is not at all understanding about his addiction, but it goes deeper than that. There's almost, both characters almost have sort of a pathological, but different pathological problem with being really in a relationship, being really part of a relationship. Hers is very superficial. She's kind of subscribing to this whole, sort of the rules style version of tricking men into doing what you want them to do. And he's in the school of telling women what they want to hear to their face and then going and doing whatever you want when they're not around. So what changes that is she decides to send him, that he needs to go to college and better himself and, take a class. And it's really about her sort of showing her power over him, or showing that she can manipulate him into whatever she wants to do. But in the class, he meets Julianne Moore, who kind of stumbles on the fact that he's into pornography, and loans him a video that he watches it, and he's like, I don't know why you gave me this. I don't know what this is all about. And it's like, it's not really the kind of stuff I watch. And she was like, well, that's why I gave it to you, is because this is what real sex looks like. This is a really romantic adult video. And he's like not sure about all of that. And they sort of start up this friendship, and she's in a place where her husband had recently passed away, and she's really sad, and she's not looking for another relationship. She's not looking for another boyfriend, but she also is really lonely and really wants someone in her life. The difference is that she's very upfront and honest about that, and the parts of it that she does sort of hold back at first are more about not overwhelming him with how sad she is and how bad things have really gotten for her. So it's a movie that it starts in sort of one direction and it ends in a very different place, it ends in a very different direction. But all of the acting and the writing is really so good that it's worth checking out. It's also a movie that I think a lot of people will have discussions about if they see it together. You know, if you see it with your significant other, or you see it with someone that, you know, maybe has a different opinion than you about the role of pornography or the role of manipulation or what real relationships look like or any of that sort of stuff. It's a really, really interesting movie. Wouldn't recommend it as a first date movie, but apart from that, I would say definitely check it out. I'm really glad I saw it, and I recommend it to a lot of people. It's also really impressive that it's Joseph Gordon-Levitt's directorial debut, and he does a really great job with it. He really makes it's a great looking movie. The story is very interesting. The characters are really well done. He made me hate Scarlett Johansson. Like, I hate that character, and that's pretty impressive. If, you know, an actress that you like quite a bit is playing a character that is so manipulative that you're just sort of like, yeah, I don't want anything to do with that character. So I enjoyed it. I would check it out. And finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about my favorite movie of 2013. This is kind of a strange favorite in that it's not like an Oscar-nominated movie, and it's not necessarily, a smashing success of a movie or anything like that. It was just kind of this quietly released movie that came and went, and a few people saw it, and sometimes I talk about it and people sort of remember it, like they've seen it, but they don't remember that the name of it was The Way, Way Back. But the movie I'm talking about is The Way, Way Back. And it's this interesting coming-of-age story about this kid that gets trapped going to... he's basically going for the summer to this beach property, and he's there with his mother, who's played by Toni Collette, and her boyfriend, who's played by Steve Carell. And what's really interesting about those casting choices is that Toni Collette doesn't have a whole lot to do in the movie that you would normally see them really like utilize her and do a lot of stuff with her. She's really just sort of trying to deal with the fact that she's this kid's mom and trying to look out for him, but also really trying to look out for her relationship with Steve Carell, because she's convinced that like he's her last chance for happiness. And Steve Carell is a really interesting cast choice because he plays a complete jerk. He's terrible to the son character behind the mother's back. Just a complete ass to everybody. And to some extent, including Toni Collette. But again, it's like he's so successful, and people, around him tend to like him and gravitate toward him, that it's sort of convinced Toni Collette's character that he's worth hanging on to. So the son character ends up going to... he finds this water park in town, and he just kind of sneaks in and hangs out there at first, and he meets up with the guy that's essentially running that water park, which is Sam Rockwell's character. And it has this really interesting storyline from there where Sam Rockwell is sort of, telling him that it's okay to be himself, and he has this whole other side of himself that he finds at the water park where everybody's just there to have fun and have a good time and really enjoy their summer, and he doesn't have to deal with the baggage of his relationship with his mom's boyfriend and all of those sorts of things. When I first heard about the movie and saw sort of the plot synopsis and everything, I thought it sounded a little bit like Meatballs, sort of like if Sam Rockwell was playing Bill Murray's character in Meatballs. And it is a little like that, but it's so much better than that movie. Meatballs is really good because Bill Murray's in it, and that's really about it. Like, the rest of that movie is not all that great. But this one, it's Sam Rockwell is fantastic in that role, and that's a role that you really want to see him in. But they also kind of point out the fact that he's also kind of a bit of a loser himself. Doesn't really have his act together either, but he's at least in a place where he can help this kid, this high school aged kid, sort of figure out that he's worth it and he's all right. And sort of juxtaposing those two situations, the situation that he has at the water park and the situation that he has at home with the mother and the boyfriend characters. So it has a really great ending as well. I really like the way that was done. There's exactly one scene that Sam Rockwell and Steve Carell are in together, and it's great. It's worth it. Yeah, I don't want to say too much more about it. I don't want to give away too much more about what's going on with that. Sam Rockwell is one of my favorite actors, and that does have a lot to do with why I made a point of seeing this movie and checked it out. But I would say that he's maybe 50% or maybe a little bit more of the reason that I like this movie. I really like the way it was written. I like the way it was done. It's just a really great little coming of age story with really good actors and really interesting characters, and it really fits a lot into that storyline. It really seems to feel like a whole summer's worth of story right in there. So anyway, those are movies that I really recommend quite a bit to people. They all came out in 2013, and so before I move on into doing my sort of end of the year lists for 2014, I wanted to get this out there so that I can kind of put 2013 away as far as things that I'm recommending online and move into those. So hopefully you found at least a couple of movies in there that you haven't seen and that sounded interesting, and be happy to hear what you think about them. Leave me a comment or send me a tweet or something like that, and enjoy. Thanks.